Most mountain bikes have gears, and those gears use metal braided cables to control them. They need to be smooth, clean and unfrayed in order to work correctly and with the minimum amount of friction. When they become old or bent or tattered, they need to be removed, and that's exactly what we're going to show you now. First thing to do is adjust the gears so that you're in the smallest sprocket. Release the tension on the old cable. We're going to use the snippers, cable cutters that we have here. As you can see, it's a nice solid jaw on there, and we're going to remove the cable end so that it can be drawn back through. This is a SRAM derailleur, so there is a tiny little mounting hole which guides the cable in here. We'll pull it out of there. It's worth remembering that that's an important part of this derailleur's function, so when we are threading the cable back through, you have to make sure it goes under that hole. We can leave that hanging loose and move up to the front of the bike. In order to access the head of the cable, we have to use our Torx wrench, T25, sometimes called a star wrench, to access the mounting bolt for the shifter, and do that. This is the SRAM XO integral brake lever and shifter, so it has a mount, keeps the bolt inside, but the shifter unit comes off. Then by undoing the thumb wheel at the top on this particular unit, this is a SRAM unit, the cover comes off to one side. Now what we need to do is pull the cable very slightly, and because you've already cut the end off and taken the pinch bolt off, you'll find that it will pull out quite neatly. What that allows you to do, if you just lift that spring very carefully, you'll see the nipple of the gear cable. So what we're going to do, given that we've released the other end, so we should be able to pull this, be a bit stiff, but you can pull it. It gives you some slack. Now when you lift the spring very slightly and push the cable, as you can see, it's pushed out of its housing and it's now available for us to pull, although it'd be quite stiff because this is a continuous run of outer cable all the way to the rear derailleur. There's some friction involved in pulling it out, so it's going to take a little bit of pulling. Sometimes you have to, there we go, just break the seal almost, and we can now pull the gear cable all the way out. We need that, so pop that cable end back on there. Sometimes the end of the cables, because they are kinked and a bit frayed, sometimes can be a bit tricky to pull out. There you go. Now it is worth remembering before you pull the cable completely out, the way the cable needs to go back in. You'll notice that the cable enters the barrel adjuster inboard of this little spigot here. So it needs to go in its little hole, around and through and out inboard of that, and out through the adjuster. It's just that it's too easy to pull the cable out, see the hole and then not be able to figure out exactly where the cable goes, but that's how it goes. So we can throw the old cable away, we can get ourselves a new cable. It's always worth using new cables. It's too important a part of your bike to really worry about reusing old cables. Occasionally there's enough on a rear cable that if you trim it down carefully, it'll be long enough to use as a new front cable. I've done that a few times, numerous times in fact, at a push. But again, new cables are a bit of a treat for the bike, so wherever possible it's nice to use those. So taking the non-nipple end of the cable, we place it underneath the spring, back through the hole the cable goes into. Now can be a little bit of a push. Remember, you're trying to push something that's straight through something which wants to be curved. And as you can see, the natural tendency for the cable is to push up against that spigot. So what we need to do is tempt it sideways. If we use one of the other tools that we have in our pocket, just to nudge that over sideways, push it like that. You can see it goes all the way over. There you go, you can feed the cable all the way through. Keep pulling it, lift the spring very slightly, ease it under with your fingernail, pull it tight. Now the head of that nipple there is fully home and it's bedded exactly where it needs to be. So the next step is to take our shroud, make sure that it's the right way up and the right way round. Pop it back on and start to tighten up the little thumb screw. Next thing to do is, you can mount this up now into the outer cable and then attach the pod to the bar, but to be honest, with only two hands, I find it's easier usually to mount the pod back to the handlebar, give the handlebar something to do. Then you can begin to thread the cable itself into your outer housing, through the fitments on your frame, and as you feed it through, eventually, if you're using a continuous run of cable, you'll see the cable poke out of the piece next to the derailleur. You'll notice we took the ferrule off the end when we threaded it through. It's because sometimes the inner cable can run up against the inside of the ferrule and not make its way through. So leaving the ends uncut is worth doing because it makes the act of feeding the end of the cable through that hole a whole lot easier. So slide that down, make sure it goes firmly back onto the end of the outer, feed the inner wire through. So you see that clipped nicely back into the back of the derailleur. Take the inner wire, curve it round. Remember, this is a SRAM derailleur, so there is a little bridge hole there to go under to guide it. That's going to guide it all the way back around this knuckle, and it comes round the back of the pivot point there and then into the channel, which you can see is in the bottom of the derailleur there. And then just tighten up the pinch bolt by hand very slightly so it's almost but not quite fully home. Now we need the third hand tool. On a longer cable, this would fit nicely. With a squeeze of the tool, I can tension the cable. You can see it trying to move the derailleur as I tension the cable. Obviously, it's important that the derailleur isn't moved out of line of the smallest sprocket, otherwise your gears won't be adjusted properly when you do it back up. Give the pinch bolt a bit of a tweak. Might need to just give your inner cable a slight adjustment depending on whether or not you feel you need to make adjustments on the new cable. On this particular system, using this barrel adjuster. The barrel adjuster screws out, basically makes the cable outer longer because you're extending the length of the adjuster. That takes up the slack. If you develop a lot of slack in your system and you end up with the shifter barrel adjuster almost all the way out, it's a good idea to shift the barrel adjuster back in to almost fully home, then take up the slack using the pinch bolt. Some older derailleur systems have another barrel adjuster back here. Typically old Shimano systems have that system, and so you can also make some fine adjustments at the back of the derailleur. But that in essence is how you replace a derailleur cable, and you can move on to the next job.